We're going to talk about the Lake District now. The Taj Mahal, the Great Barrier Reef, the Grand Canyon, they're all UNESCO World Heritage sites, so protected by the UN effectively. And in a few weeks' time, the Lake District could be added to that illustrious list. After several unsuccessful attempts to secure a nomination, the national park was listed in March last year and is now awaiting the final decision, which is due in the next week. The rolling hills, the glistening waters of the lakes have proved obviously an irresistible draw for poets, thousands of visitors, millions of tourists, in fact, every year. But is winning World Heritage status truly in the interests of the site? Critics say the park is ecologically in a bad way, and obtaining World Heritage status would prevent it from improving. Others argue the status could attract more funding and investment. Well, we can discuss the pros and cons with the author George Monbiot. Hi, George.
Hi there.
And to Lake District-based hill farmer Will Cobain. Hello, Will.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Right, where exactly are you, Will?
I'm just outside Keswick, about a mile and a half outside Keswick.
OK, right, let's set out your respective stalls. You're behind this bid, Will. Why do you want to see the Lake District be a World Heritage site?
Well, it's a culture and heritage bid. It recognises the interaction between man and the environment over hundreds, if not thousands of years. Farming plays a big part in that bid, but it's also about the mining. We've had copper and lead mining. It's also about, the pencils. Keswick is the birthplace of the humble pencil. We had axe making. There's a whole range of activity that has gone on in the Lake District in the past, which is of cultural and heritage significance, which is being recognised by this bid.
Right.
This bid does not undermine the environment in any way, in my opinion.
Right, OK. George, then, it's that interaction between man and the environment which is your problem with all of this. You said it would be a disaster. How so?
Yeah, I'm not against the idea that it should have World Heritage status eventually, but on the basis of the current bid, it would be a disaster because the bid is riven with falsehoods. It's absolutely full of them. It says that the land is in good physical condition. It's not. It's a sheep-wrecked ecological desert, which has been stripped of all the trees above about 600 feet, massive soil erosion, massive erosion gullies, huge problems right across the district. Almost all the birds, almost all the insects have gone. And it says nothing about Brexit, so there's no means of telling how on earth its vision of one great big sheep museum, which is more or less what it's talking about, will be sustained because sheep farming there is wholly dependent on European subsidies. And these are the sort of falsehoods and omissions which should disqualify this bid outright.
Well, let's get down to some of those points you made there. A sheep-wrecked ecological desert. The birds and insects are all gone, Will, and it's your fault.
Well, no, it's not. And George makes some very controversial, very outspoken and deliberately provocative comments. I mean, we wouldn't be doing the interview but for George's fairly provocative comments. They have got media attention, but let's just look at the environment. Let's look at something as humble as the red squirrel. There's large tracts of England now where red squirrels have disappeared completely, but in the Lake District we've still got a reasonably good population of red squirrels. That's down in part to the conservation organisations and a lot of individuals who have tried their best, but it's also in part because we've actually got a habitat that red squirrels like. So I just do not accept that this landscape, which 17 million people per year come and visit and enjoy, is in any way resembling what George describes it as.
Well, let's talk about red squirrels. It's a classic example. The red squirrel is a woodland creature. It's confined to the tiny pockets of woodlands at the bottom of the valleys. The fells, which would once have been wooded, have been stripped of all trees because the sheep nibble out the tree seedlings so the trees aren't able to grow. So the red squirrel is in these tiny pockets where it's quite vulnerable as a result. You come down from the fells into those woodlands and you suddenly realise what you've been missing. You hear birdsong, you see wild mammals, you find insects, and it's all those things are almost completely absent from the high fells because of this EU subsidised sheep wrecking which has been taking place there. And the problem with the bid is that it's in danger of setting that in stone and making it much harder to change towards a more sustainable, more inclusive cultural heritage, which actually recognises the Lake District as a seat of conservation.
That specifically, Will, that charge of overgrazing, effectively, that George is making.
Well, There was some overgrazing probably 25, 30 years ago when it was first noticed. I was one of the farmers that actually said, yeah, look, we've got a bit of a problem here. I don't think it was ever as bad as George makes it out to be, but steps have been taken to address that. I mean, there was something called the Lake District Environmentally Sensitive Area Scheme came along in 1993, virtually 100% uptake by the farmers. A lot of the land is now in either favourable, unfavourable and recovering, so a lot of progress has been made over the last 25, 30 years. Tens of thousands of trees have been planted in the Lake District, especially since around 2006. And some of the high fells never had trees on. You know, some of it's just as the last ice age left it. But, I mean, Borrowdale, around Ullswater, Windermere, there's lots of areas of woodland.
Yeah.
And there's probably more woodland now than there was 100 years ago. Okay. And 100 years ago, there was no subsistence.
George,
sorry.
George, no, I mean, all I was going to ask, just on sort of behalf of some of our listeners, I guess, I was in the Lake District, about a month or so ago, and I went on Windermere, went on a lovely little motorboat on the lake. What a wonderful day it was. But I just wonder, 17 million people who visit the Lake District every year, how many of those people do you think are leaving with the impression that they've been to a sheep-wrecked wasteland?
You know, there have been 2 studies done, both of them showing people pictures of the Lake District as it is, then pictures with more trees and more trees and more trees, you know, photoshopped on, and say, which of these views do you favour? And in almost all cases, people prefer the views with more trees. And so this whole idea that you have to have this ecological desert in order to attract visitors is simply false. It does not stand up. And as for this notion that it's no longer overgrazed, you know, when you've got a situation that tree seedlings simply can't grow because every single one is being nibbled out by sheep, I'm sorry, Will, that's overgrazing. When you've got a situation of erosion gullies still forming because the soil's being stripped off the hills, I'm sorry, that's overgrazing. And if this bid is to turn the Lake District into a great big Beatrix Potter themed sheep museum, as it threatens to do, then that will contribute to the ongoing ecological destruction of one of our great national properties.
A Beatrix Potter sheep museum.
Well, I just don't recognise that. I mean, George will be familiar probably with the valley in Newlands, where up above the Newlands Valley there is some very ancient oak woodland, which has survived for centuries. You know, and it's okay.
And how much regeneration is there? How many saplings?
George would like to go back to probably around 5,000 years ago. That is completely unrealistic. I mean, some of the erosion is down to the frequency of rainfall that we get now, the severity of the slope. I mean, actually, and this is probably a good thing, the mammal that is most prevalent on the Lake District fells now is actually human beings. There are more human beings visit the Lake District and walk about than there are sheep. Sheep numbers have been reduced by about 50% over the last few years. So I firmly maintain that we are at a place now where the sheep numbers, by and large, there may be some tweaking still to do, are sustainable going forward.
I don't want to go back.
Do not have this trashed landscape. You know, I don't think very many people at all.
Final word from George, and then I just want to come back to you, Will, just to see whether you think you're going to get the status. But George, we've gone final word on what Will just said there.
I don't want to go back 5,000 years. I want to go forward to 2017. I want to go forward to a Lake District that actually works for everyone, rather than the just 1,000 farms that are there, which seem to dominate everything at the moment.
Okay.
This bid makes that harder.
Do you think you're going to get it, Will?
Well, I hope so, and George says he wants to move forward. We want to move forward. We believe the World Heritage Site bid will enable us to move forward, recognise the culture and heritage and the landscape, and even if we get a 1% increase in the cultural visitor spend, that is worth £20 million to the Lake District economy. That is a huge amount of money for an area of smaller Lake District. So I think the World Heritage Site has nothing but good to offer.
OK, thank you. We shall see. Thank you very much indeed to Lake District-based hill farmer Will Cobain and to the author George Monbiot as well. Whether you agree with his argument or not, George does give quite good sound bites, doesn't he? I would ask for your thoughts. We've only got 5 minutes left of the programme. It's 5 minutes to 12.